Well, she took over at the age of 25 years old. She was a woman, she had 2 young children, and she took over at a time that it was a man's world. And there's an iconic picture, which I had tweeted a couple of days ago, which, when she came back from Kenya, as some pronounce, walking down the steps of that flight, and waiting for her was the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill.
So this was when she came back from the flight as Queen?
Exactly. So she was proclaimed as Queen when she was still in Kenya, but of course, or Kenya, I'm not sure how to pronounce.
Let's do Kenya.
Let's stick with Kenya. She wasn't, of course, coronated until the following year in 1953, but she was Queen in 52. So she walks down the steps. There is Winston Churchill. Next to her is Clement Attlee. Next to her was Anthony Eden, who was going to be the next Prime Minister. I mean, it was iconic to see something like that. So that was her first Prime Minister, Winston Churchill.
Apparently she was so nervous. I don't know if this is true or whether it's folklore, but she was so nervous in her first meeting with him, she could barely speak.
It's possible, but don't forget that she was brought up at a time, even when she was 12 years old, that she broadcasted to all the other children in the country who were being evacuated. And also my father was being evacuated from East London at the time into the country because of the bombing from the Germans. So that was taking place across the country, and she, as a young 12-year-old, with her sister Margaret sitting next to her, was in front of a microphone, similar to the microphone I have in front of me right now, and saying, just reaching out and saying it's going to be okay. And that was who she was. So she was brought up in that.
So do you think that she had the training, so to speak, to be okay, that she wouldn't have been intimidated by a character like Churchill?
Look, you always, if something is important to you, and as a media trainer, as somebody who helps people within communications as well, I always say that if you haven't got the nerves, butterflies, the adrenaline flowing around it, a feeling of excitement before you go on air, you do something on stage, you're doing the after-dinner speech in front of important people, or it doesn't even have to be important people, then if you haven't got that inside, there's something wrong. It means that you don't care about what it is that you're doing. Sure, you've done it many times before, but the fact is that if you haven't got that feeling and excitement, it's the butterflies are always there, is what I say, but it's the professionals that get them to fly in formation. And you have to have that feeling of adrenaline beforehand. So does she have that feeling? Probably yes. But yet we're always told when leaders around the world, they're nervous before they meet her. And she is the one who's putting them at ease. She's the one who's smiling and just asking them about everyday events. That's quite extraordinary because, again, what I started off by saying is in those days, in the 50s, talking about the early 50s, 1952, it was a man's world. It was a man's world in the 60s and the 70s, probably the 80s and halfway into the 90s as well. And yet she saw all these prime ministers. Amazing.